7 years after registering our marriage, Ethan and I decided to finally have the romantic wedding we couldn't afford back then. That day, I slipped into the wedding gown I had designed myself and walked toward him, my eyes brimming with anticipation. But before I could even utter the words I had carefully rehearsed, the ceremony was interrupted by an accident. In the midst of the crowd's shock, Ethan dashed toward a woman who had fainted, for the second time at my wedding. His eyes were red with panic. "Call an ambulance," he shouted. As he left the hall, he didn't even glance back at me. When the church bell tolled 7 times, I calmly pulled off my veil and turned to the remaining guests with a smile. "As you've all witnessed," I said, "today is no longer my wedding to Ethan, it's our divorce ceremony. Please enjoy the food and drinks. Make this trip worth your while." 1. Ethan didn't even bother to call to explain himself. The next day, I only found out about his whereabouts through a social media post. At 3 a.m., no less. The post included a photo of 2 hands intertwined, accompanied by the caption, "Asterisk, I've walked through life like a pawn on a chessboard, never stopping for anything, except for you twice." Asterisk. Without a moment's hesitation, I liked the post and commented, "Best of luck to you both." I had barely set my phone down when it started ringing. The caller ID read, "Husband." I thought he might have seen my comment and was calling to explain. But when I answered, a soft, delicate voice greeted me instead. A voice fraught with fragility and punctuated by faint coughs. "Grace, cough, cough. It's me, Liv." And just like that, the last shred of hope I had crumbled. Suppressing the discomfort rising within me, I replied coldly, "What do you want?" Perhaps she was caught off guard by my uncharacteristic response, by the fact that I didn't immediately ask why she was holding my husband's phone. After a brief pause, she said, "Ethan went to fetch some hot water to wipe me down. He forgot to take his phone with him. How careless of him." Her voice was frail, every word spoken as though it took great effort. "Grace, I didn't mean to ruin your wedding yesterday. I didn't expect my condition to act up. Don't blame Ethan, okay?" As she continued to speak in her breathy, uneven tone, I suddenly heard Ethan's voice in the background, gentle and full of concern. "Liv, why are you up? Go lie down. Let me handle this." Cough, cough. "You're always like this. I only have a little problem and you get so worked up like you're about to cry." "It's not that serious," she murmured. I was no stranger to Liv's tactics, her penchant for playing the helpless victim. None of this surprised me. What irked me, though, was their insistence on dragging me into their little drama, to use me as a prop in their twisted narrative. "Don't worry," Ethan said, his voice tender, the kind of tenderness he once reserved for me. "I won't let anything happen to you." "Okay, I know you care about me the most," she replied, her tone dripping with sweetness. "Now go back and finish the wedding. Grace has been waiting 7 years for this. I promise I won't show up this time. Please." Toward the end, her voice broke, as though she were on the verge of tears. Ethan's tone softened further. "There's no point in holding the wedding anymore. We've been married for so many years. We don't need such meaningless formalities." I nearly dropped my phone. The way he spoke so gently yet with such cruelty, it felt like a knife to my heart. A wave of nausea surged within me, but I forced myself to stay calm. I managed a cold smile and said, "Since the two of you have so much to discuss, I won't interrupt. Ethan, I don't know where you've been staying when you're not home, but I've sent the divorce papers to Liv's address. Don't forget to sign them." Before I could hang up, his angry voice erupted on the other end. "Grace, do you have to bring up divorce every time like some bitter, spiteful woman? Is this fun for you? Yesterday was an emergency. What was I supposed to do? Watch Liv die in front of me?" I chuckled bitterly but stayed silent. In the past, Ethan would always handle our conflicts with cold indifference, letting me cry and shout while he quietly chain-smoked. But today his outburst felt like the culmination of emotions he had been suppressing for years. I was the one who had been stood up. Yet somehow he was the one who was angry. And now he had the audacity to call me a bitter woman? He didn't understand only a miserable marriage could turn a woman into that. We had known each other for 10 years, been married for 7. I had stood by him through thick and thin, from nothing to the day his company went public. But all of that, the storms we weathered together, the years we shared, amounted to nothing in the face of those 2 words, bitter woman. Ethan, I said, my voice steady, if you don't sign the divorce papers, I'll take this to court. I was tired. This time, no matter how unwilling I might feel, I had decided to cut my losses. 2. Ethan must have picked up on the exhaustion in my voice because he paused. When he spoke again, his tone had softened. Isn't this all because you wanted a proper wedding? We'll have one eventually. There's no rush. Liv had a heart attack yesterday. If I hadn't acted quickly, who knows what could have happened? And what about your social media post? I asked, unable to suppress a bitter laugh. Who did you stop for? That was just a fleeting thought. Do you have to blow it out of proportion? How was it me who was overreacting again? These years, how many seemingly harmless posts like this had he written? I could usually pretend not to see through things, but that was only because he had always been aware of his status as a married man, restrained and polite. But that didn't mean he could humiliate me the same way twice at my own wedding. Olivia was Ethan's junior from the same university. 7 years ago, during our simple yet warm wedding, she had pulled the same stunt. Just as the groom was about to utter the words "I do," she, an invited guest, interrupted the ceremony with a dramatic outburst of sobs and chaos. Then she collapsed unconscious. Ethan had no choice but to rush her to the hospital. He stayed by her side for 48 hours straight. Our wedding ended in shambles. The social media post he made that day first read, "As long as she's safe, that's all that matters," before he added asterisk, "and we tied the knot." Asterisk. Sadly, I failed to grasp the hidden message at the time. Not wanting to inconvenience our relatives with another trip, we decided against holding a makeup wedding. When Ethan saw my disappointment, he comforted me with a smile. "Don't be upset, Gracie. Once we're rich, we'll throw a wedding every year." I had laughed at his joke. Now, 7 years later, as I approached 30, I thought it was finally time to make up for that regret. After all, we only have one youth to live. But once again, he put everything on hold for her. On the other side of the phone, I could hear Olivia's quivering, tear-streaked voice. "Grace, I've been weak since I was little. I didn't mean to faint at your wedding." Cough, cough. The phone was abruptly taken from her, and Ethan's voice followed, low and accusatory. "That's enough, Grace. You've got the title of Mrs. Gu. What more do you want? Liv is already in so much pain. Why are you making a scene with someone who's sick?" A cold smile crept onto my lips. "Making a scene? Olivia's pain stems from you stringing her along while clinging to your role as my husband, refusing to give her a proper status." The words seemed to choke him on the other end of the line. They didn't realize that when Mrs. Gu no longer cared about keeping up appearances, there was nothing left unsaid. The proud little darling in white? She could keep her innocent act. I wasn't going to carry the blame as the woman who knowingly stayed in a love triangle. Sure enough, it didn't take long before sobs could be heard on the other end. Ethan ignored me, his voice softening immediately as he comforted her. "Liv, don't get upset. I'll make her apologize to you." Then with a harsher tone, he barked at me. "Grace, Liv's emotions are unstable right now. I need you to go see her within the next 30 minutes. Otherwise, the divorce papers, I'll sign them the moment I get them. And don't think your childish reverse psychology tricks." I hung up before he could finish. Even though I knew there was no room for reconciliation, his blatant favoritism still twisted the knife in my chest. 10 years of misplaced affection. 7 years of a failing marriage. I didn't escape either. Ethan and I first met at a university mixer. He was tall, charismatic, and checked every box on my ideal type list. From that moment on, I couldn't stop myself. To pursue him, I even gave up an exchange program opportunity and stayed in the country. I used every spare moment to travel across cities to his university, fabricating accidental encounters. On the 9th attempt, I finally wore him down. He reluctantly agreed to give us a try. Even later, when we got our marriage certificate, it was my idea. I never thought our relationship felt cheap just because I was the one chasing him. He was a decent boyfriend and for a time a good husband, except for that faint trace of a wandering heart. I thought I was capable of holding on to it. After getting married, we clawed our way through hardships and eventually built a successful business together. As more and more accomplished women filled his social circles, I never let it bother me. When he attended social events and faced all kinds of temptations, I didn't feel uneasy. It wasn't until Olivia returned to the country that I started losing confidence. From her dramatic outbursts to my silent endurance, I constantly told myself, as long as he doesn't cross the line, it's all in my head. But my boundaries kept crumbling, while his heart grew narrower and narrower. So narrow that it could only hold matters related to Olivia. When Olivia had a bad day, he canceled an international conference to comfort her. When Olivia moved houses, he, the CEO of a company, personally helped her pack. When Olivia got sick, he was by her side around the clock. If I questioned him, his answer was always the same. Olivia was alone in Haicheng, and as her senior, it was his duty to take care of her. If I pushed further, I was accused of being unreasonable and petty. He forgot that I was the one he had vowed to cherish. He forgot that, as a couple struggling with infertility, we needed to work together if we wanted to welcome new life into our home. During that time, I was the only one clinging to our empty promises, enduring round after round of painful injections. And now life played a cruel joke on me. I was finally pregnant, but I couldn't keep it. After packing my bags, I booked a flight for the same day to leave the country. 10 years ago, my parents and brother had moved abroad for business. I was supposed to join them as an exchange student, but I stayed behind for Ethan, causing an irreparable rift with my family. They were so disappointed they didn't even attend my wedding. 7 years ago, the only family member at the ceremony was my grandmother, who had stayed in the homeland. 7 years later, Grandma had already passed away. Looking back, I was relieved she didn't have to witness the farce of a groom walking out on his wedding for another woman. Ethan had no idea how hard it was to build a life from scratch. Nor did he know that the wedding gift my grandmother had entrusted to me was, in fact, the deed to a luxury downtown apartment worth millions, something my mother had quietly given me. Naively, I thought that if Ethan ever learned how I had fought with my well-off family for his sake, he might feel guilt-ridden and remorseful. So, I chose to keep playing the role of the unloved girl from the countryside, neglected by both parents. Without ever facing real hardships, I secretly sold that downtown apartment. The proceeds paid off the debts his family had accumulated, freeing him to focus on his ambitions. The rest? I poured it, bit by bit, into covering the losses of his failed ventures, giving him countless opportunities to try again. Finally, he succeeded. From a cramped rental to a home we could call our own, I stayed by his side, sacrificing my youth willingly. But self-delusion is truly a disease. If I couldn't even cherish myself, how could I expect anyone else to? Feeling numb, I stood up, ready to head to the airport. As I opened the bedroom door, I saw Ethan collapsed on the sofa, looking drained. His gaze landed on the suitcase in my hand. Irritated, he pinched the bridge of his nose and said, "What's this? Another one of your runaway stunts. Why didn't you answer my calls?" I glanced at my watch, my tone composed. "What do you need from me?" I had never spoken to him with such politeness before. He froze for a moment, taken aback. "Grace, what is it that you want?" Can't you just say it outright? I left the wedding venue because of an emergency last night, and now you're going around telling people it was some kind of divorce ceremony? You're suffocating me. I've explained this to you countless times. Liv and I are just like siblings. Back when I was struggling to get my business off the ground, she gave me so much comfort and encouragement. That's what got me through those tough times. Now that I've made it, is it so wrong to look out for her a little? You're the one overthinking everything and making yourself miserable. What am I supposed to do about that? So, it turns out all he needed to get through those hard times was some comfort and encouragement? My money, what a waste. I listened quietly until he finished, then nodded. I understand. You understand? If you really understand, then why would you provoke Liv like that? Your words upset her so much that she's been crying in secret, feeling completely down. Fixing this mess is your responsibility. If you don't go to the hospital and apologize to her right now, this isn't over. His tone was commanding, as though issuing orders to an employee. As a CEO, he'd grown accustomed to treating me like this. My eyes stung and I stood there for a long time frozen. It wasn't until he got up and walked over to me that I finally looked up at him. Tall and steadfast like a mountain, he no longer shielded me from life's storms. Impatient, he urged, "Get to the hospital. Liv's rest time ends in about an hour. I'll take a quick shower and join you later to stay overnight with her. There's a dessert shop across from the hospital. Get her some matcha truffles. They always lift her mood, and she won't hold a grudge against you anymore." After saying his piece, he waited for my response. I kept my composure, lowered my head, and murmured a soft I wanted to argue, to say something back, but the overwhelming sadness in my chest silenced me. All these years together, he could remember someone else's favorite dessert, yet he was clueless about me. The cheesecake I'd shared with him countless times? He had no recollection of it. The floral dress I wore again and again? He couldn't even remember it was the first gift he had ever given me. The wedding gown I designed with my own hands? When he saw the finished product, all he said was that I should learn more from the professionals. When I loved him, I could come up with endless excuses for his behavior. I told myself he was just too busy to focus on the little things. But now I could no longer lie to myself. It wasn't that he didn't have the bandwidth to care. He simply didn't think I was worth the effort. Ethan, so self-assured in his innocence with Olivia, never once thought to yield to me. This time, though, my calm demeanor seemed to catch him off guard, softening his tone slightly. Leaving the venue abruptly was my mistake. I'll explain everything to the family and friends later. If you want a wedding so badly, I'll cooperate. I'm not unreasonable. I want it. You'll cooperate? In the past, I might have argued with him, saying, "That's the wedding you promised me," or "That's the grand ceremony you owe me." But now I didn't even have the energy to argue. I brushed past him and headed for the door. "Grace, you're just a bored housewife making problems out of nothing. I'm warning you. Get your attitude straight. It'll be better for both of us. Don't pull any stunts on me." When I ignored him, Ethan finally dropped his calm facade, throwing out empty threats at my retreating figure. But I felt nothing. My heart was as still as the water's surface. I just wanted to wrap up one last thing before leaving the country. At the same hospital where Olivia was staying, I had an appointment for an abortion. Those years, in consideration of his feelings, I was the one taking birth control pills, which left me with lasting health issues. When we finally decided to have a child, it turned out Ethan had fertility problems. At first, I thought about leaving with this tiny life inside me. I could afford to raise the child on my own. But now, the mere thought of being tied to Ethan for the rest of my life through this shared bond of flesh and blood made me nauseous to the point of dry heaving. Walking into the hospital, my heart was steeled. Yet, after the procedure, when I was told the life inside me was gone for good, tears spilled uncontrollably from my eyes. After 2 hours of observation, The doctor cleared me to leave. I got up and walked out. On the hospital pathway, I saw Olivia clinging to Ethan's arm, acting coy. When our eyes met, Ethan had his back turned to me. Olivia showed no sign of guilt. Instead, she deliberately leaned closer to Ethan, her chest brushing against him ever so slightly. "Thank you, Ethan, for always being here for me," she cooed, her voice loud enough for me to hear every word. Her shameless display, had it been the old me, would have earned her a slap in the face. But now I no longer had the strength. It was growing late, and this was the shortest route out of the hospital. I didn't bother taking a detour. With a calm expression, I walked past them as if we were strangers brushing shoulders. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Ethan freeze for a moment, about to come after me. But Olivia clung to him tightly, refusing to let go, trapping him where he stood. "Grace? Is that you?" He finally recognized me, but I had no intention of responding. Angered, he chased after me and grabbed my arm. When his eyes fell on my pale face, the accusations he had prepared softened into something else. "The stuff I told you to get for Liv, did you buy it? I taught you exactly how to make it up to her. Why can't you save me the trouble for once?" A bitter smile played on my lips. "You told me to come to the hospital, didn't you? Well, here I am. I see your Liv looks perfectly fine, happier than ever. She doesn't seem like she's dying, does she? Instead of matcha truffles, why don't you just give her yourself?" "You're impossible," he roared, shoving me forcefully. Caught off guard, I stumbled backward. My hands instinctively reached out to brace myself, but the rough pavement scraped against my skin, leaving it raw and bleeding. For a moment, the air around us froze. Slowly, I stood up, dusting myself off with a serene expression. "I can't outfight you, Ethan, but I know when to cut my losses. Don't forget to sign the divorce papers." My words seemed to ignite a fury in him, his eyes blazing with rage. "You're nothing but a jealous woman. Look at yourself, what a disgrace." I couldn't hold back any longer. "A disgrace? You want to talk about how I look right now?" "Ethan, I wasn't born to be some resentful housewife stuck at home, waiting on you hand and foot. Every award-winning design your company has hanging on its wall, I created them. I willingly stood in your shadow, not so you could look down on me like it was your right. No one likes doing the laundry and cooking, only to be told they have no value. And no one enjoys constantly fighting over some homewrecker. That kind of life can go straight to hell." My voice had risen to a crescendo, only to drop again, quiet and steady, like the aftermath of a roller coaster ride. When the chaos stops, all that's left is emptiness. Ethan didn't respond. For a fleeting moment, guilt flashed in his eyes, but it was quickly replaced by his usual cold indifference. "If you were more understanding, we wouldn't be where we are now." I let out a bitter laugh. Slap. The force of my hand meeting his face was so strong, I could feel the sting reopen my earlier wounds. Every time he stonewalled me, wasn't I the one to reach out trying to fix things? Had it become so normal, so expected, that he thought he was the one who got to make the rules? With the shameless cheater glaring at me, I turned and left the hospital without looking back. I planned to rest for a few days and heal before leaving the country for good. Barely had I lain down when my phone rang. It was my best friend, Zoe. "Are you okay? I've been trying to call you, and you weren't home when I came by." She had missed my wedding because all flights from Canada to here were grounded due to weather. After I explained everything, her voice began to tremble with anger. "Those two scumbags better stay locked away forever so they don't come out and discuss the rest of us. How dare they treat my Gracie like this?" I paused for a moment before saying, "You remember that riverside villa you helped me hold under your name? Put it on the market. I don't think I'll be staying in this country anymore." Zoe had been my childhood friend. Before she became financially independent, she had been cut off during a family feud over inheritance. Back then, I sold one of my own properties and used a portion of the money to support her startup. Not as an investment, just to help her. When she succeeded, she bought the Riverside villa as a gift for me, insisting on holding it in her name so Ethan wouldn't take half of it in a divorce. I laughed at her paranoia at the time. But now, 3 years later, here I was dividing assets. On the other line, Zoe said, "If you're leaving the country, then let's sell it. Gracie, I promise I'll find you the best divorce lawyer. When she handles things, I never worry. But when bad luck strikes, it comes in waves." The very next day, Zoe, who was helping me deal with an empty villa, told me someone had already moved in. I figured she must have been away from the country too long and made a mistake about the location. That was until Zoe called me on video. The house number was correct. The surroundings matched perfectly too. She looked at me frustrated and asked, "Gracie, be honest with me, I won't get mad. Did you ever tell that scumbag about this villa?" I answered confidently, "No." When Zoe insisted on giving me this villa, it was precisely to guard against someone like Ethan. I didn't want to upset him, so naturally I never mentioned it to him. But in the video, the supposedly empty house was clearly well furnished, exuding a lived-in warmth. My villa. If not Ethan, who else would have the audacity to move in without my knowledge? Seeing me lost in thought, my best friend added, "The locks were changed. I had someone break in. It seems they just moved in recently. Nobody's home at the moment. Do you want to come over and take a look?" Despite feeling drained, my curiosity got the better of me. I hailed a cab and headed over. The moment I stepped inside, I was utterly unprepared for what awaited me. Olivia. She stood there fuming. "Grace, was it you who had someone break into my house?" My immediate reaction was to look for Zoe. "Where's Zoe?" "You mean the trespasser? I had her tied up and sent to the police." "So, Grace, you're the mastermind, aren't you?" I reached for my phone to call Zoe, but Olivia snatched it from me, throwing it to the ground and stomping on it repeatedly. "Grace, you old hag, do you really think you're someone important? If you don't apologize to me today, I guarantee you won't see Ethan for the next 10 days. I frowned, forcing myself to stay calm and analyze the situation. Olivia had broken into my property and then sent Zoe, the rightful owner, to the police? What kind of twisted nonsense was this? Since returning to the country, Olivia had been renting an outrageously expensive apartment near Ethan's office. I only found out recently while reviewing our finances that Ethan was supporting her. The divorce agreement already included provisions to reclaim that money. But I never imagined she'd end up here. Zoe had said the villa seemed newly occupied, which meant Ethan had been planning to give her a home for some time. Was this his way of spiting me? A wave of dizziness washed over me. Ignoring her provocations, I asked directly, "Who told you to move into this villa? This is my home. Why shouldn't I live here?" "Your home? Weren't you forced to return because your family could no longer support your lifestyle abroad? You haven't worked a single day since. How could you possibly afford a villa in this neighborhood?" At this point, there was no point in pretending anymore. She assumed I was going to bring up marital assets. Smirking, she slowly retorted, "As Mrs. Gu, you should have more class. Ethan won't be happy about this. He didn't want to leave me today, you know. It was only because I convinced him to go back and keep you company. Really, Grace, if you'd even tried to be a little more like me, maybe he wouldn't have stood you up at the altar twice. All he wanted was for me to live comfortably with dignity. Can't you just turn a blind eye? Why make it so everyone loses? This villa was far nicer than the one Ethan and I currently lived in." Of course, she was dignified. Olivia clung shamelessly to Ethan's favoritism, boldly declaring her dominance. "Everyone loses? Not a chance." I didn't bother explaining. With a calm voice, I said, "This isn't your property. Pack your things and leave. Now." The moment I finished, Olivia let out a mocking laugh. Grace, you're impossible to reason with, aren't you? Don't give me that marital assets nonsense. Since Ethan arranged for me to live here, this villa has nothing to do with you. I pulled the corners of my lips into a faint smile. Call Ethan. Have him come here. Before I'd even finished speaking, Olivia's phone rang. She held it up triumphantly, waving it in my face. No need to call him. Between us, it's always him calling me first. I ignored her and bent down to retrieve my own phone. Zoe had already texted me to say she was safe, explaining what had happened, and was now on her way here with reinforcements. I replied with a single word. Good. As I exited the chat, I accidentally tapped on my pinned contact. The chat history between Ethan and me opened up. My fingers froze. Unable to resist, I scrolled up. The messages were almost entirely one-sided, long paragraphs from me. His replies, short, detached, no more than a few words. I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. So Olivia's boast about him always taking the initiative between them. It hit a nerve I didn't even know I had. Not long after, Ethan arrived in haste. But the first thing I heard was Olivia's voice, trembling as she called out, "Ethan, someone broke into our home. I'm so scared." He had sped here, arriving even faster than Zoe, who lived much closer. In the past, even if I had broken my leg at home, he'd only send his assistant to take me to the hospital. His precious time, it seemed, was only reserved for those he actually cared about. When you're beyond words, sometimes all you can do is laugh. "Liv, you just got out of the hospital. Go upstairs and rest. I'll handle this." Ethan didn't even notice me sitting on the sofa. The moment he saw Olivia, his arm naturally slid around her shoulders. Gently, he ushered her upstairs, his movements fluid and familiar. Clearly, he had been here often. The irony was laughable. I tried to divorce him, yet the divorce papers had been sent to the wrong address. Olivia hadn't even gone upstairs yet, and Ethan was already scanning the room for the security cameras. He probably guessed Zoe had destroyed them already. Irritated, he snapped in a low voice, "Who the hell had the audacity to do this?" Before I could answer, Olivia had already adopted a fragile, helpless demeanor. "Ethan, as soon as I got home, I found Grace had people break open the door," she said softly. At the mention of my name, Ethan's gaze finally fell on me. His eyes flickered with surprise for a brief second, then quickly hardened into mockery. "Grace, what is the meaning of this? What do you think?" I shot back. Ethan frowned slightly, as if searching for the right words. Before he could respond, Olivia clung to his arm, playing the peacemaker. "Grace, please don't be mad at Ethan. If it'll make you feel better, I'll move out, cough, cough." Just moments ago, she had been acting smug, but now she looked like she might cough up blood at any moment. Ethan's face immediately softened with concern. Finally, he turned to me, laying his cards on the table. "This house? I renovated it for Olivia. If you've got a problem, come at me directly." I said nothing, simply staring at the man in front of me. Was this really how he thought? Were these even the words of a rational person? Zoe had bought the house with her own money. She said it was a gift for me, though the property had never been officially transferred to my name. And yet here Ethan was, speaking as though he had every right to it. "Grace, don't think I don't know this house is technically yours," he sneered. "You had Zoe hold it in her name to keep it from me, didn't you? But don't forget, as marital property, half of it belongs to me." "Half? Seriously?" As long as I didn't accept Zoe's so-called gift, this house had absolutely nothing to do with me. I couldn't figure out where things had gone wrong. Perhaps it was Ethan's brain that had taken a hit. Seeing me remain silent, Ethan's expression darkened further. "You need to leave. Whatever needs to be discussed, we'll talk about it at home." Just as he finished speaking, my phone rang. I answered it with a single tap and said only one sentence. "We're inside. Come in." Ethan froze mid-turn, his body stiffening. Grace, what kind of stunt are you trying to pull now? He demanded. I didn't reply. Sometimes silence speaks louder than words. In less than 10 seconds, a group of 10 or so burly men stormed in through the door. Zoe followed behind them, her face dark with anger. Smash it, she barked. Amidst the chaos, Ethan instinctively shielded Olivia, placing himself protectively in front of her. He turned to me, his wife, and roared, Grace, what the hell are you doing? Zoe strode over and slapped a red booklet against Ethan's chest. Ethan, have you lost your damn mind? Get this clingy little leech out of my house. Olivia's face blanched. She had moved in, fully assuming Ethan had taken care of everything. She never expected the property deed sprawled across the floor to bear Zoe's name, loud and clear. Ethan, however, kept up his domineering act, grabbing my arm with force. Grace, don't think I don't know what's going on here. You used your money to invest in Zoe's business, and this house is just her way of giving you a share of the profits. That makes it part of our marital assets. You think I'd let you get away with this just because I haven't called you out on it? His words sent a chill through my heart. Zoe had already explained everything to me before she came. Ethan had only found out about the house because of a disgruntled ex-assistant of Zoe's, who had leaked the information out of spite. But so what if he knew? It no longer mattered. Ignoring him, I turned to Zoe's legal counsel. There's a layman here who doesn't understand the law. Take care of it, I said coldly. Ethan's face grew even darker. Grace, I've been letting you off easy, but now you're really pushing it. All the riverside villas in Haicheng have been sold out except for this one. The doctor said the environment here is ideal for Liv's recovery. Can't you stop being so petty? Standing beside him, Olivia's eyes brimmed with tears as she clutched his sleeve timidly. Ethan, it's all my fault. My health has caused so much trouble between you and Grace. This has nothing to do with you, Ethan said gently, his tone softening. Grace went behind my back to secretly acquire property. I wasn't planning to make a big deal out of it, but since she insists on drawing the line, I don't see any reason to indulge her any further. You stay here and rest. Let me handle the rest. Before he could finish his grand declaration, the lawyer cut him off. Mr. Gu, you have no legal authority to dispose of Ms. Zhao's property without consent. Ethan's expression turned icy. Liv, go upstairs, he said through gritted teeth. But Zoe wasn't about to let that happen. She stormed forward and yanked Olivia by the hair. 2 sharp slaps echoed through the room. This is for knowingly being the other woman. You owe Gracie that much. Another pair of slaps followed. And this is payback for having me tied up and dragged to the police station. As she raised her hand again, Ethan quickly strode over and shoved Zoe aside. Even though I had asked her not to get too involved with Ethan, Zoe couldn't hold back her sarcasm. Ethan, do you even understand what marital property means? She sneered. Go ask around. Which self-respecting man would blatantly use marital assets to support another woman and still claim he's innocent? You're even more disgusting than men who openly admit to cheating. Her words ignited a fire in Ethan's eyes. Liv has health issues. I'm just helping her within my means. Zoe, you're an outsider and know nothing about the situation. Please mind your own business, Ethan retorted, his voice sharp and defensive. This was Ethan in a nutshell. His favoritism was as clear as day, yet he still thought of himself as righteous. Zoe looked at him as if she'd just seen the most absurd joke in the world. For once she was speechless. The air between us grew unbearably thick. Breaking the tension, I spoke coldly. Zoe, since you've started smashing things, you might as well finish the job. I'll cover it. The group of burly men Zoe had brought with her seemed like professionals. At my command, they went at it with even more vigor, reducing the room to chaos. Ethan's voice boomed over the noise. Grace, that's enough. Seeing that I had no intention of stopping, he finally backed down. His tone shifted from threatening to pleading. I admit I was wrong to make this decision without consulting you. Tomorrow I'll make arrangements for Olivia to move somewhere else. Just call off these people, please. I shook off Ethan's hand and turned to Zoe. Call the police, I said calmly before walking away. This was the first time I'd shown him such defiance. Ethan stood there stunned as if he'd been struck dumb. For several seconds he couldn't move. Grace, wait, he called out, chasing after me. He grabbed my arm with one hand while using the other to call his assistant, instructing him to come over and help Olivia move out. Only after handling that did he turn back to me, his voice softening. Let's go home together. I was too weak to break free from his grip. Seeing this, Zoe rushed over and shoved Ethan hard. Caught off guard, Ethan stumbled and fell heavily onto the shards of a broken vase. A long gash appeared on his palm, and blood began to pour from it. Zoe snorted. Serves you right. Are you okay, Ethan? Olivia ran over, her face pale with worry. But Ethan's eyes were fixed on me, searching for a trace of concern in my expression. All I gave him was cold disdain. Shouldn't you personally help Olivia move out? I taunted. Ethan, you've abandoned me for someone else more than once. Don't think that choosing to stay with me this time will make up for anything. That's not what I meant. Ethan stammered, clearly at a loss for words. Failing to find the reaction he wanted from me, his gaze drifted to his injured hand. When he looked back at me, his eyes were filled with desperation, almost as if he were begging. He seemed to be asking, I'm hurt. Why don't you care about me anymore? Once I would have cried my heart out seeing him like this. After cutting ties with my parents, Ethan had become my sole source of safety and comfort. I would have shielded him from every storm and taken all the blows on his behalf. But now, I stood there calm and detached. The crimson stain on his hand even seemed to suit him. Whatever you mean, I don't care to know, I replied coolly. Sign the divorce papers sooner rather than later. That way, you can stop wasting your time and give someone else the home they deserve. With that, I shot Olivia a withering glance and walked away. Trash belongs in the trash heap after all. Grace, I won't divorce you. Ethan's voice cracked, raw and hoarse as he shouted after me. Don't think you can make this decision on your own. Every word sounded like it was being ripped from his soul, dripping with blood and fractured love. In a movie, perhaps this might seem tragically beautiful, but in real life, it was nothing short of pathetic. Zoe, sensing that I had no intention of engaging further, stayed behind to handle the cleanup. She granted me the breathing room I desperately needed. Back home, I printed a new copy of the divorce agreement, carefully placing it in Ethan's study alongside a small gift. Then I packed my bags and left. Goodbye to 10 wasted years. The drama didn't end with my departure. Ethan's infidelity became the top trending topic for days, igniting a firestorm of public outrage. Back when we started our business, the industry had dubbed us the dynamic duo, the perfect partnership both in work and in life. We were humble, even ordinary. Ethan would even tie my shoelaces in front of others without a hint of embarrassment. So when Zoe uploaded videos of Ethan abandoning me during both our weddings, the internet exploded. Public sentiment was overwhelmingly against him and Olivia, branding them as the ultimate scumbag and homewrecker duo. Even some employees from Ethan's company took the opportunity to expose his dirty laundry. When the walls came crashing down, everyone joined in to kick up the dust. As for Olivia, whether her heart condition was real or fake before, it was undoubtedly genuine now. Her social media accounts were flooded with backlash, and desperation drove her to publicly beg Ethan to marry her. But Ethan? He chose to stay silent, like a coward hiding in the shadows. Zoe kept exerting pressure, and with the string of scandals surrounding Ethan's leadership of Goo Corporation, investors began pulling out one after another. The stock price plummeted like a free-falling stone, crashing lower and lower. Inside the company, chaos broke loose. Everyone was on edge, fearing for their futures. Over the past few years, the company had been working on a long-term transformation plan, a strategy heavily reliant on the investors' capital. Yet, the same investors, once so confident, chose to breach contracts rather than stay, leaving the company on the brink of financial collapse. This was news I only learned after spending 2 months recuperating abroad. I knew the true value of GU Corporation all too well. Those investors weren't acting out of doubt in the company's potential. They still had faith. I had assumed that Zoe's attempts to pressure them into withdrawing would be met with refusal. But I underestimated her ruthlessness. She was unrelenting, unstoppable. So be it. It no longer concerned me. Zoe told me that the day Ethan came home and found the divorce papers, with the ultrasound report and the abortion paperwork tucked inside, he lost control. He went mad, desperately searching for me. He tracked down everyone even remotely connected to me, only to be met with scorn and condemnation. Everyone berated him, calling him a fool for letting someone who truly loved him slip through his fingers. But he persisted. He even went to my late grandmother's house to look for me. Throughout our years of marriage, Ethan had never once suggested accompanying me back to visit my family. Back then I secretly felt relieved. It saved me the trouble of explaining too much about my family's situation. Looking back now, was that really normal? To him, I was always someone to be dismissed. A small-town girl, unworthy of love in his eyes. It was only after much inquiry that he discovered the truth. My parents and older brother had been living abroad for years, running their own businesses, rarely returning home. And the reason they kept their distance from me was because I had defied them countless times for Ethan's sake, leaving them deeply disappointed. In reality, my parents' anger had softened not long after our wedding. I had wanted to take Ethan abroad to meet them several times. But every time he brushed me off with disdain. Your parents? The ones who didn't even bother showing up to our wedding? Why would I waste my time meeting them? When work finally eased up on Ethan's end, something would come up with Olivia. And so, the meeting was postponed over and over again. All my parents ever wanted was a gesture, an attitude from Ethan. But even by the time we divorced, they never got one. In the 2 months Ethan spent searching for me, he rarely showed up at the office. The board of directors was outraged. He also refused to sign the divorce papers, perhaps clinging to the belief that as long as we remained married, I would eventually return to him. I knew that for a couple like us, having built the company together, with me handling the internal affairs while he managed its external operations, dividing assets in a divorce would not be easy. Neither of us wanted to get less than we thought we deserved. Ethan, for all his faults, probably just didn't know where to draw the line. But I couldn't be bothered to dig up concrete evidence of infidelity just to reduce his share. So I filed for divorce. Word eventually got back to me through various channels. Ethan had demanded that I appear in person, or he wouldn't cooperate. Unwilling to drag things out any longer, I decided to return. On the day of the court hearing, the man who had always been so meticulous about his appearance looked disheveled. His hair was messy, and his bloodshot eyes spoke of sleepless nights. The moment he saw me, he rushed over. He seemed like he wanted to reach out and touch me but hesitated, pulling his hand back at the last second. After a long pause, his voice broke as he asked, "Does it hurt? That day at the hospital when I saw you." I looked at him as if he were a fool. "A little," I replied. "It hurt for a while, but then I felt refreshed afterward. Just like this marriage. A marriage with a grain of sand lodged in it, constantly rubbing, causing pain. I'd tried so many times to remove that grain of sand, but I never succeeded. So I went for the simpler solution. I threw the whole marriage away. Wasn't this what you wanted too, Ethan?" Hearing my reply, he stiffly pulled his lips into some semblance of a smile. It took him a while before he spoke again, his voice faltering. You've lost weight. I paused briefly. How ironic. The man I once thought I couldn't live without was now standing before me, saying words of concern, and yet, I felt nothing. No love. No hate. Just peace. I smiled lightly and told him, no, I haven't. I've actually gained 2 pounds. He stared at my smile, stunned for a moment. It seemed like he finally realized I truly didn't love him anymore. His voice cracked unexpectedly as he started to speak. I always thought you were the one person in this world who would never leave me. So, I took your feelings for granted. When I found out you'd aborted the baby we had struggled so hard to conceive, I hated you so much. But then I thought about it. About how much you love children, about how hard you worked to get pregnant. I couldn't bring myself to blame you. I didn't have the right to blame you. I know you're still angry with me, and I've been punished for it during this time. But now that you're back, please don't leave again, okay? I gave him the simplest response I could. The hearing is about to start. Let's go inside. With that, I strode into the courtroom. But after waiting for a long time, I realized Ethan wasn't coming. I had anticipated his lack of cooperation, but I didn't expect him to be this shameless. After assigning all matters to my lawyer, I left the country that very day. I began taking over the family business, and thanks to the skills I had honed over the years, I adapted quickly. I heard that Ethan's company has pulled through. I was relieved. It meant I could get more out of the divorce settlement. In my busy life, I'd occasionally come across jokes he made, shared through mutual acquaintances. Ethan knew how hard it was to reach me, so every time he gave an interview, he'd look straight into the camera and send me his messages. Gracie, as long as you come back, I'll always be here. Gracie, I've been working so hard to move closer to you. Please just look at me one more time. Gracie, the world is so vast, yet I can't seem to find you. If you see this video, can you please reach out to me? His heartfelt confessions, paired with Olivia's disgrace as the other woman, gradually seemed to redeem his image in the public eye. Even the court was convinced that our marriage hadn't irretrievably broken down. Fine. Let's drag this out. By then, anything related to Ethan had ceased to matter to me. Not even worth a frown. A year passed, long enough for me to forget I still had the title of wife hanging over me. Finally, my lawyer called with the news. The court had approved the divorce. I felt nothing special, just transferred a hefty fee to my lawyer's account to thank them for their hard work. At last, I reclaimed my golden singlehood. The next time I saw Ethan was on the day of our alma mater centenary celebration. I was giving a speech on stage when I noticed him seated in the far right corner of the first row. His gaze, intense and unwavering, felt like a spotlight pinning me in place. It was impossible not to notice him. But the years hadn't been kind to him. He looked so aged that, for a moment, I mistook him for an alumnus several years my senior. When I mentioned, I have no regrets about not going abroad as an exchange student back then, a spark lit up in his otherwise hollow eyes. It was as if he was waiting for me to say something more. But I continued my speech. Over the years, I've experienced the allure of foreign art and education systems, and yet, I often felt a profound sense of estrangement I couldn't quite articulate. There's no right or wrong in culture. I just think that for the younger me, there were paths better suited to who I was. That's why I didn't choose to go abroad. The university I earned my place in, I was determined to stick it out, even if I had to cry my way through. At this, the audience burst into laughter. I wrapped up with a final note. To all of you as your senior, let me leave you with this. When you find yourself at a crossroads, listen to the truest voice within your heart. A wave of applause followed as I concluded my speech. In the hallway afterward, Ethan suddenly appeared and blocked my path. His tone was firm, almost desperate. You're lying. You stayed because of me. You didn't go abroad because of me. I looked at him, my response calm but direct. I thought that at first too. Later I realized it wasn't true. I just didn't want my parents controlling my life. You were just collateral, an excuse for my rebellion. I don't believe you. Ethan shook his head violently. I don't believe you. If there was no one here tying you down, why would you come back? Just for some ridiculous speech. Believe me or not, Ethan, it's irrelevant. If you don't want me to call security, please respect yourself. Don't call me Ethan. His voice carried a wounded edge. Do you know what it felt like when I found out it was you silently helping my company with its financial crises all those years ago? It was like my heart had been ripped open. When I thought about how you gave up your parents for me, followed me alone into the unknown, and yet I still had the audacity to divide my attention with another woman, I realized I wasn't even human. If it weren't for antidepressants keeping me afloat, waiting for the chance to see you again, I wouldn't have made it this far. I forced myself to hold on because I couldn't bear to see the company we built together collapse. It's our child. We can't lose another child. Gracie, even if we're divorced, I can start over. I'll chase after you like you once chased me. As he spoke, Ethan pulled a diamond ring out of his pocket. Gracie, I owe you a proposal. I'm making up for it now. Marry me. Faced with this absurdly dramatic display of affection, I could only shake my head. You still don't get it. I chose you out of rebellion, and when the cost of that choice became too great, I clung to you because I couldn't let go. But in the end it was all for nothing. So I let go of you decisively. Throughout this entire process there was purpose, there was resentment, but there was never love. Without love, looking at you now feels no different than looking at a stranger. Do you understand? Whether those words were entirely true or not no longer mattered. But the man in front of me clutched his head with both hands, his face contorted in anguish. Then, as if suddenly unhinged, he began slamming his head against the wall. Over and over he cried out, "No, it's not possible. You love me. You said all your designs carried your love for me." The commotion drew the attention of others, and soon, someone stepped in to hold him back. I didn't stay to watch. I walked away with resolute steps. Later, I heard that Ethan injured himself severely that day. He now spends his days in a mental institution. As for me, my dazzling life is just beginning. The end.